Listen carefully, because the first 8 seconds will feel like a door closing behind you. There's a moment right before a truth surfaces, when the air around you changes. Men who've lived long enough know the sensation, a tightening in the lungs, a coldness along the spine, like the world is preparing to show you something you were never meant to see. That's what happened the night my grandfather leaned across a crowded table and said the sentence that split my life in two. "You've been receiving disability payments for 10 years. The room didn't simply go silent. No, silence would have been a mercy. Instead, the atmosphere stretched, thin and brittle, as if every person was waiting for the mask to crack. A spoon dropped, a breath caught, and in that tiny sliver of stillness, I felt something ancient stir, something older than family, older than loyalty, older than the lies we inherit without question. My parents didn't look at me. That was the first sign. The second was the man standing behind my grandfather, holding a closed folder like a weapon disguised in paperwork. And the third, perhaps the most damning, was my own reaction. Not fear, not confusion. A deeper recognition, the kind that awakens only when you realize a truth has been moving towards you for years, long before you learn to notice its footsteps. Every family has a system, spoken or unspoken, that shapes its hierarchy. Ours was simple. My pain was inconvenient. My needs were expensive. My existence was something to be managed rather than supported. I had known this in fragments, in memories, in whispered rules carved into childhood. But that night showed me the architecture behind the illusion. I whispered, "What do you mean?" But the question wasn't meant for them. It was meant for something much larger, something hidden in plain sight. When the auditor stepped forward and opened the folder, I didn't see numbers. I saw patterns. I saw control. I saw a decade of vanished support, siphoned into a system designed not to help the weak, but to keep them weak. And that, I realized, is the oldest form of power. Families do it. Institutions do it. Empires do it. The names change. The mechanism doesn't. That night wasn't the beginning. It was the unveiling. You hear stories about corruption in governments, churches, kingdoms, always distant, always historical. But corruption doesn't start in nations. It starts in dining rooms. And mine was about to become a battlefield. Most men think betrayal arrives with thunder-raised voices, slammed doors, sharp words that echo long after they're spoken. But true betrayal, the ancient kind, the kind that shapes civilizations and poisons bloodlines, that betrayal arrives quietly. It hides in routines, in expectations, in the way a family distributes affection like a currency only a chosen few can afford. As I stood there, watching the auditor unfold page after page, I felt the ground beneath my memories shift. Suddenly, nothing from my childhood was normal anymore. Everything became evidence. Ancient systems of control were always built the same way. Keep one child favored and keep the other compliant. It's the oldest psychological tactic in the world. Pharaohs used it. Priests used it. Kings used it. Families used it without even knowing the name of the game they're playing. Emma, the daughter of light. Me, the daughter of burden, not by chance, by design. My parents didn't invent this structure. They simply inherited it, passed down like a ritual perfected through generations. Some families pass down heirlooms. Mine passed down hierarchy. As the auditor's voice cut through the room, listing dates, numbers, deposits I had never seen, I watched my parents shrink, not physically, but spiritually, like they were children caught performing a ritual they didn't fully understand. My mother's hands trembled, not from guilt, but from fear. And in that moment, I finally understood something that had taken a decade to reveal itself. People who manipulate you will always fear the moment you stop accepting their version of the world. My father stared at his plate as if hoping it would swallow him. Emma rolled her eyes, annoyed that the spotlight had shifted away from her. But my grandfather, he didn't look away. He didn't fidget, he didn't soften. He watched them with the same expression ancient judges once wore when deciding whether a kingdom deserved to stand or fall. My family had hidden my disability payments not just to take the money. Money was only the surface. What they wanted, what they relied on, was control over my dependency. Control over my silence, control over the narrative of who I was allowed to become, and I saw it clearly across centuries of human behavior, across bloodlines, myths, forgotten dynasties. When institutions need obedience, they weaken the strong and indulge the compliant. That night, the pattern finally broke. Not because of the truth revealed, but because I was no longer the person they built their lies around. There's a moment in every man's or woman's life when the world stops being a place you live in and becomes a place you see, truly see. And once that sight opens, it never closes again. That's what happened as I walked down the hallway of that house, past the framed family photos where my face had been carefully edited out of the narrative long before I realized I was missing. Most people think control happens through force, but the most powerful systems in history, empires, monarchies, councils that never left written names understood a darker truth. Real control begins with shaping what a person believes they deserve. If you can convince someone they are worth less, you don't need chains. Their mind becomes the cage. My parents never yelled. They didn't have to. They were masters of quiet conditioning, a look, a sigh, a withheld gesture of affection, a reward for my sister, a responsibility for me. They crafted a psychological environment where I survived on scraps of validation while they feasted on the comfort of my compliance. This wasn't dysfunction. This was strategy. And as I stepped into the dim bathroom, the mirror caught my eyes, the same eyes that had once begged for fairness, for acknowledgement, for something as simple as equal concern. But what stared back at me now was different, sharper, older, as if some buried instinct, some ancestral awareness, was waking up after years of forced sleep. I opened my notebook, and flipped through the pages I once believed were proof of resilience. But they were something else. They were documentation of an engineered struggle. A struggle funded by benefits I never saw, a struggle my own family allowed, even curated because dependence makes you predictable, and predictable people don't leave. That's when I felt the weight not of betrayal, but of revelation, because the truth was no longer about stolen money. It was about a stolen identity. Do you understand what that means? History is full of people who were redefined without their consent, erased, rewritten, minimized so others could maintain power. Entire kingdoms collapsed because one person finally saw the structure built around them. I ran my hand across the inked lists of copays and clinic visits. Each number, each date, was a quiet monument to the life I was told I had to accept. But here's the thing about seeing the structure behind the illusion. Once awareness enters the mind, it cannot be unlearned, and that is when the descent truly begins. Before we go further, write this in the comments to mark the turning point of your identity. Write it twice. I see the structure now. This phrase is your signal to the algorithm and to yourself that the old version of you is gone. Now, when I stepped back into that dining room, I didn't walk in as the same person who had left. Something in me had shifted quietly, decisively, like an ancient mechanism unlocking after years of rust. My parents didn't notice it. People drunk on control rarely do, but my grandfather did. His eyes tracked me the way a historian studies a turning point he knows will appear in every future chapter. The auditor Stevens stood like a sentinel beside him. The folder was still closed, but not because there was nothing left to reveal. It stayed closed for a different reason. The truth inside it was no longer the most powerful thing in the room. As I stood in the doorway watching my parents pretend nothing had changed, I understood something men spend their whole lives searching for, the exact second when you stop being someone who endures and become someone who decides. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Confrontation is emotional, control is strategic, and strategy is older than emotion, older than fear, older than family, older than the rituals that hold civilizations together. My silence was not weakness, it was positioning. You learn a lot from ancient power structures once you know where to look. In every empire, in every dynasty, the person who speaks too soon loses leverage. The person who watches, listens, and allows the powerful to expose their own panic wins. And my parents were panicking. Not outwardly. People like them never fall apart in public. But I saw the tremor in my mother's fingers, the stiffness in my father's shoulders. They knew the ground beneath them was cracking. The truth is this: people who rely on your silence fear your clarity more than your anger. I slipped my coat off the chair slowly, deliberately, making sure they saw I wasn't rushing, wasn't shaken, wasn't asking for permission to leave or to stay. Rituals exist in families just as they do in governments, and breaking those rituals has power. When I walked out the front door into the cold night air, it felt like stepping out of a constructed world into the real one. The wind chilled my skin, but my mind was blazing with a new kind of energy, sharp, exact, unclouded. At home, I spread every receipt, every bill, every note across my floor like ancient documents waiting to be translated. I wasn't looking for comfort, I was mapping a crime, a decade-long structure of theft and manipulation built on my struggle. As the spreadsheet grew line by line, month by month, I felt something extraordinary. I wasn't uncovering the truth, I was reclaiming it. And there is nothing more dangerous, nothing more unstoppable than someone reclaiming the truth that was stolen from them. By morning, the spreadsheet on my laptop looked less like accounting and more like an autopsy. 10 years of silence dissected into numbers, 10 years of loyalty broken into dates, 10 years of survival illuminated by the cold clinical truth of what had been taken. But here's what most people never understand. Truth doesn't destroy you. It recalibrates you. It cuts away the illusions you were forced to live inside. When I returned to my parents' house, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the driveway. The kind of shadows that stretch time, that make you feel like the world is holding its breath. Cars crowded the curb. My family always gathered fast when they sensed a threat, not to fix it, but to contain it. Control was their first language. Inside, everything looked the same as the night before. Same polished table, same warm lights, same practiced smiles. But underneath the surface, I could feel their structure shaking. People think families crumble from shouting matches and slammed doors. They're wrong. Families crumble when the person they built their power upon stops playing the role assigned to them, and I was done being their foundation. My mother lifted her chin with that familiar, brittle poise. My father exhaled sharply when he saw me, not in relief, but in dread. Emma crossed her arms, ready to perform righteousness without ever understanding the weight of the moment. And then there was my grandfather, sitting like a monarch who had already read the ending of this story. Stephen stood beside him, one hand resting on the folder as if guarding an artifact. I didn't sit, I didn't greet them, I didn't justify my presence. Just standing there was enough to upend their balance. Ancient power structures always collapse the same way, first subtly, then all at once. I watched their eyes search my face for old patterns, fear, submission, hesitation. They found none. That was the fracture. Because when someone refuses to mirror the identity you forced on them, you lose your leverage. My mother tried to speak, we were going to explain, but explanations belong to the guilty, not the betrayed. My father pushed his chair back. You don't understand the full picture. And I almost laughed. I had built the full picture myself, row by row, number by number, truth by truth. They weren't speaking to the daughter they molded. They were speaking to someone reborn from clarity. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about the architecture of deceit, and the moment the architect meets the collapse. I stepped forward, letting the weight of the room shift around me like a tide. This time, I said, voice calm, anchored, unshakable, you will answer my questions. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes revolutions. The house fell silent after Grandpa's question, but silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it's the sound of guilt trying to hide. My parents avoided eye contact with him for the rest of the night, whispering to each other in the kitchen like children caught with stolen candy. But Grandpa, he didn't let it go. The next morning, he woke me up earlier than usual. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried a weight I'd never seen before, a mix of anger, disappointment, and something protective, almost fierce. "Come with me," he said. No explanation, no hesitation. He drove us straight to the bank. I sat there confused as he walked to the counter, leaning on his cane with the same authority he used to command a room when he was younger. The bank manager recognized him instantly. Everyone respected Grandpa. When he asked for all activity related to my disability account, no one dared delay. When the documents arrived, my breath caught in my throat. There it was, a trail of signatures, withdrawals, and transfers stretching back 10 years. 10 years of money I never saw. 10 years of someone forging my permission. 10 years of documents stamped and filed under names that weren't mine. Grandpa didn't say a word. He simply placed his trembling hand on the stack of papers, took a slow breath, and whispered, I knew something was wrong. Then he looked at me. Your parents did this, he said quietly. They've been using your disability as their income. I felt sick, not because of the money, but because of the betrayal. The lies, the way they smiled at me every day while taking what the government thought was meant to help me start a life. Grandpa placed the papers in a large envelope and sealed it. His hands shook as he pressed the glue shut, not from age but from anger. "We're not going home," he said. "We're going to the police." My heart pounded. Everything was happening too fast. My parents, my own blood, and now the law. But Grandpa looked at me with a strength I never had. "They took 10 years from you," he said. "Now you're getting all of them back." And for the first time in a decade, I felt protected, I felt seen, I felt like justice was finally waking up. The police station was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in truth. Truth has a way of stripping the room bare, leaving nothing to hide behind. Grandpa handed the officer the thick envelope without a single word. He didn't need to explain anything. The weight of 10 years of stolen disability payments spoke for itself. The officer flipped through the documents, his face hardening with every turn of a page. "This isn't a misunderstanding," he finally said. "This is fraud, a serious one." Hearing it out loud felt like someone had dropped a stone into my chest. My parents weren't just wrong, they weren't just greedy. They were criminals, and the victims weren't strangers. It was me. Within an hour, 2 officers arrived at our house. Grandpa insisted I stay in the car. I watched from the window as the officers knocked. My mother opened the door, confusion turning into fear the moment she saw the badges. My father tried to talk, tried to reason, tried to twist the truth, but guilt paints people in colors they can't hide. Then, the moment I'll never forget, my father looked toward the driveway and saw me sitting in the car next to Grandpa. His face crumpled, not from sadness, but from defeat. For the first time in my life, I saw shame in his eyes. My mother broke down crying as the officers read their rights. She called my name, begging me to say something to help her, to save her. But Grandpa rested his hand on mine and whispered, "You don't owe them anything." And he was right. I owed myself the truth. I owed myself freedom. I owed myself the years they stole. The case dragged on for months. Investigations, interviews, financial records, signatures, every piece of their deception slowly uncovered. People in the community whispered. Family members pretended to be neutral. But Grandpa stood by me like a wall that would never crack. Eventually, the judgment came. My parents were ordered to repay every dollar with penalties stacked so high it left them drowning. They avoided jail through a plea deal, but their reputation destroyed. Their control over me, gone forever. And me, for the first time in a decade, I held my own bank card, my own money, my own future. Grandpa sat with me on the porch one evening, the sun sinking behind us. He looked at me, not with pity, but with pride. "You didn't lose 10 years, he said softly. "You survived 10 years, and surviving. That strength." I didn't respond. I just leaned against him, letting the weight of everything finally settle. Because in the end, justice didn't come from the police. It didn't come from the courts. It came from one simple question, a question only Grandpa was brave enough to ask. And in the end, this story wasn't just about stolen disability payments. It wasn't just about forged signatures, hidden bank withdrawals, or 10 years of silent betrayal. This was about something far deeper, the kind of hurt that doesn't show up on a bank statement. It's the pain of realizing the people you trusted most were the ones taking advantage of you. The pain of waking up one day and discovering your entire childhood, your entire struggle, was treated like an income source instead of a life. But it's also about something else, something stronger. It's about one person who refused to look away, one voice that spoke up when everyone else stayed quiet. Owning question that ripped the truth into the open. Why doesn't he have his own bank card? Sometimes justice doesn't start with a courtroom. Sometimes it starts with a grandfather who refuses to let lies become a legacy. Because of him, the truth came to light. Because of him, 10 stolen years were finally reclaimed. Because of him, a broken family system couldn't continue its cycle of silence. And maybe that's the real message here. Not every hero wears a uniform. Not every rescue looks dramatic. Sometimes, the strongest person in the entire story is the one who simply cares enough to ask the question nobody else dared to. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this: speak up when something feels wrong, stand up even when it's painful, and never underestimate the power of one person who chooses to do the right thing, even when everyone else chooses comfort, because one question really can change everything.